Breaking the wall of human rights abuses. Salvador Regilme, Freie Universität, Berlin.
After the fall of the Berlin Wall and the apparent triumph of liberal democracy in the early 1990s, extrajudicial killings, torture, and enforced disappearances are still very much widespread in today's world, especially in other parts of the world outside of Europe and the United States. Meanwhile, contemporary Afghanistan, for example, Pakistan, Uganda, and other countries, and even Jordan, for example, are the top recipients of foreign aid from the US government. At the same time, our public understanding says that these are also some of the countries or the biggest violators in terms of their own human rights, the human rights of their own citizens. In 2008 alone, around 100 billion US dollars is given by rich countries, including the United States as well as Europe, to poor countries. My research project, which is about to conclude this month, answers two basic questions. Does foreign aid impact the human rights situation in recipient countries? If it does, under what conditions does it transform the human rights situation? I developed a theory, and as a political scientist, I use cross-national statistical studies, intensive fieldwork in Southeast Asia, as well as archival research to test two important hypotheses. The first hypothesis is that when foreign aid is given for highly militaristic or counter-terror purposes, and that the domestic authority or the domestic leadership of those governments receiving that foreign aid, it is highly likely that there will be an increase in human rights violations. We can see here the conjugation of transnational and domestic conditions. In this particular graph alone, for example, not graph, but map of Colombia, you can see that those regions in Colombia which are receiving high amounts of foreign aid, those are also the regions where a lot of extrajudicial killings, torture, and enforced disappearances are intensely reported. The second hypothesis that I tested, and which seems to be very, very plausible, at least in my fieldwork in Southeast Asia, and cross-nationally all over the world from the 1970s until the present moment, is that when you diversify the range of purposes of foreign aid, so not only militaristic purposes, but also for economic and development goals, and that the receiving government has a very strong domestic authority within and beyond the state apparatus, we see a lesser number or a lower number of human rights violations. How do we break the wall of human rights violations in aid recipient countries? We do that by diversifying the range of purposes, and not only about militaristic purposes, but also having a very strong leadership in those domestic governments. Thank you.